Hello and welcome to Dell's Gaming, and this is From the Depths. And after a little while there's been another update. It's been out for a bit over a week and had some improvements, some changes, so time to have a look at it. I've had a little bit of a play with it and it's got some very interesting parts for my campaign and the way I like to build ships. So this is version 2.5.2.8. 7 is in 0.7 was released, but they've put a 0.8 which has done a couple of little fixes. There is a few bugs in it, but nothing humongous. I think they can work on those. So what have we got? Now, first of all, there is a couple of big changes, but I'd like to go through a couple of small ones which I noticed in the build first, just as a starter for 10, shall we say. Now, first of all, simple weapons. So if I bring up the build menu, the simple weapons now have had a little bit of a changes to some of the stats that which may affect your vehicles, etc. Most of them, let's just go through. Now, the heavy weapons I don't think changed too much. The main differences I saw were in the medium and the custom weapons. Now, going through the medium, what they have done is the material cost and the health has significantly increased. I think the health is now 3,000. I think before it was only something like 500, and I think the material cost was maybe a quarter of 250, somewhere around that. Now it's 1,000, and that goes through all the way. They are more able to withstand damage, but they do cost a lot more. Some of my ships have got a lot of these, so they will be more expensive, but also they won't get wiped out by the slightest little ding from a small APS gun, etc. Won't blow them up. Downside on it, or a change to the actual weaponry as well, especially the 14 mils. They have a longer reload capacity, or reload time, sorry, should I say now, but their explosive radius is much higher. Now what this means is they will fire a burst of fire fairly quickly, and then there'll be a big pause, but a relatively big pause, whilst they reload potentially. Yeah, I'm plus minus on this, in that normally on these guns they have enough people reloading them fast enough to keep them going, so they're a steady rate of fire. But it sort of fits within the gameplay. Now the twin 40s, this is where they got a bit of an advantage. They will reload quite quickly, 9 seconds. The octuple, 30-second reload. So if you use all of those, and it's got a magazine capacity of 200, but it could theoretically use those 200 pretty quickly if you work it out. It's we've got 8 barrels, 200, so we're looking at 20 rounds of no, not 20, it's going to be, let me just work that out. So it's 25 rounds per barrage of 8, and it reloads at half a second, so it's going to get rid of them all in about 12.5 seconds. So you then have about another 18 seconds to wait for reload, if my maths is correct. This one, let's just work that one out, with a 40mm magazine capacity of 16, firing 2 at a time, means you've got 8 rounds, and it's at a quarter of a second, so it's going to fire them all actually within about, according to that, about 2 seconds, and then take 8 seconds to reload. So it will load quicker in comparison, but not fire for as long. So this will fire, get rid of them all fairly quickly, take a little while to reload. This will get rid of them, take longer to get rid of all the shots, but take a long time to reload. Hopefully that makes sense. Same with the 20mm, except it hasn't got that increased explosive radius. The 50mm from memory has had a bit of a buff to health and cost. The other one was these guns here, especially the case-mated guns, have got a significant increase in health, 4.5 and 6,000. So they're definitely a lot more healthy, less chance of getting just taken out. Pity about the barrel not lining up on this, but never mind. I did put that into a bug. I don't know if it's my game or... Anyway, going off topic as always. How does it look? Well, that's the easiest way to do this. So you can see that the shells from the 40mm, I have got a fail-safe, but it doesn't seem to like using it. But they are quite powerful. You can see the twin is now reloading already, and the quad went for a little longer. They didn't last too long. Let's see if I can put a few more up to get them to last a little longer. So I like the explosions of the new 40mm. It looks much more like a flak barrage. The slightly increased explosive radius and the looks of it looks quite good. I think the increasing cost of these guns is good because they were looking like they were a little overly powered. Fail-safes on the... I don't know what's wrong with the fail-safes. I think because this is split so much, it's not detecting... and it's deciding to try and destroy itself. But hey-ho, from the depths. So whilst we are on guns, but not simple weapons, the APS has had a little changes. Some of the heads and kinetic damage, especially for small caliber kinetic guns, have had a bit of an increase, so that's good. A little bit more kinetic damage that will help the small caliber guns to be basically effective. Now it's reduced the kinetic when using a hollow point head compared to a heavy head. I'm not sure exactly where the difference in damage is there, but it's quite obviously you can look at your own particular setups whether it's still worth using the hollow point. I like the hollow point because when it hits a target, it ensures that whatever is behind, if I put a secondary charge or HE, it does explode rather than bouncing. But you know, each of them have their own preference. See here, heavy load, that's got a nice armor piercing of 32, kinetic damage 166, hollow point up thump damage 14, 151. So yeah, you might want to have a look at your smaller guns just to see whether it's worth changing over to an AP head. Another bit is on ECM systems. Now at the moment in ECMs you have primarily you've got the active controls, which actually are under miscellaneous: heat decoys, sonar decoys, chaff emitter, which basically reduces your signature. Now under AI we've also got the sensor scrambler. Now that was called something else and my brain cannot remember what it was called, but basically now you give this power and the power will affect the scrambling of incoming sensors. As you can see here, the strength here at 500 meters, 77%. Now obviously, I'm not 100% certain if that is the maximum or whether that is a reduction in the sensor capability, but basically the more power, that's at 100, if I give it the maximum power of 10,000, you can see those sensor accuracies go considerably down, so that must be where it's the maximum strength of the sensor incoming. Not 100% certain yet exactly on the mechanics of these. Also, if you get multiple of them like I have here, their strengths are added together, so 5 of them here would actually have a strength of 400, so it would be the same as where I can see it as having 500 power. So it'll work out your strength for the ship 400 and then apply that rather than running one at 5. So it's going to work out the same. As far as I can tell, there's no advantage in running 5 at 100 rather than 1 at 500. But again, if I'm wrong on that, please leave in the comments below. Didn't see anything on my quick scan around about exactly how this is applied, but it's going to be interesting if you want to create your stealth ships, etc., to use a chaff decoy and maybe this sensor scrambler to basically make your ships less detectable, and also missile warheads will have a more difficult time targeting your ship and less accurate, so that could all work together. It could be interesting in I'm thinking a sub with basically running this as well to scramble sonar that's coming in. Don't know if that'll work, but that might be something I would like to look at. So in this update, one of the big changes has been to the Steam system, with some changes to make them potentially more efficient if built correctly. They're not just more efficient, you have to build it. And there's a couple of basic changes you need to take into account. First is boiler pressure. Boiler pressure is the basically how the system can use whatever steam you have to create power. Now I've just created a small generator here just for example, but basically a set pressure will produce a particular amount of power in a generator or piston setup, no matter which boiler system you have set up. It's about the pressure. Now where the efficiency comes in is, first of all, the more boiler space you have, the less materials you need to burn to create a particular pressure. So basically, more boiler space, you can produce more pressure or the same amount of pressure with burning less materials, which is okay. The other nice bit is that under the burn rate control, if we look under the burn rate, we've got a 0.5 here. Now if your burn rate, I believe, is below 0.5, then there is a basic efficiency enhancement, should we say, or it's increased efficiency is the right way of saying it. So the lower you can set that burn rate, the more efficient the burn, effectively. So it doesn't seem to above 0.5, so if we take our burn rate up here, we'll set it up to 1 first so you can see what happens. So we'll base it on 1. So if I go to 1, you'll notice our burn rate is 1.44. If I take it down to 50%, the burn rate is 0.72, which is half. So that's fine. If I now take it down to 25%, the burn rate is 0.15, which is less than a quarter. So basically, lower than 0.5 means that the pressure will be reduced significantly. If we can get the burn rate down to a tenth, we're down to 0.01 materials per second, which is much more efficient than previous, where it was a linear scale. Now we have some type of efficiency curve, shall we say, but it's only basically running at lower pressures. Run your boilers high, they're going to have to run high as well. The other bit is the change to this UI. You'll see there is a target pressure. So we can, instead of setting a specific burn rate, which we've got here, I can set instead a pressure. So if we want, let's say we want 4,200, I can set the pressure to 4,200 and say auto regulate, and now it will change the burn pressure. So at the moment it's got the burn pressure at full, doing 1.44 until it gets its boiler pressure close, and then it starts putting materials in to keep the pressure around our setting. Personally, I think that rate of change on that screen is not great, and they could put some sort of PID system in so that it sort of gradually reduces the burn a little bit better, so we could actually see what burn rate you've got. It seems to be going from 1 to 0, 1 to 0, which is not efficient. We would like to say, okay, if I set a boiler rate at 4,200, which I know is about 0.5, then it should eventually moderate around 0.5, not flicking between 0 and 1. That's my view. Obviously, to make it more, to use the efficiency. Or you just ignore this, and we just set the burn rate at resting value to be 0.5, and I know that will give me a nice burn rate at the starting. So that will settle down to a nice burn rate. Also, ACBs, you can control that pressure. So on an ACB now, if we just put it here, two things we can do. A couple of things we can do. First, we can get the steam pressure from the closest boiler. So the closest boiler here, I can get the steam pressure. So I can then make an action based upon the steam pressure in that particular area. So if I set this to 4,500, so once we have detected a pressure, we can make an action, and the action can include a steam boiler version where we could set the automatic regulation on off, or change the target pressure, or change the burn rate. So we could theoretically set the automatic pressure to based upon if enemies in range or not. So set the target pressure to be very low if there's no enemies in range, etc. The other main efficiency gain in steam boilers has been the type of boiler you use. In comparison to the smallest boiler, which we'll take as the base unit, the medium boiler, for the same number of blocks used, so we've got 9 blocks of small and it has a boiler chamber of 7.2, the medium boiler has a chamber of 7.8, so that's about a 10% increase in boiler space or boiling chamber. So that means it needs less materials to reach a given pressure, which we've said as before, a particular pressure defines the power you're going to get out of it. So here we're burning 0.72 to get 4,275, and here we are boiling 0.63 to get 4,168, close to similar sort of pressures. And the outgoing at the other end into the turbine is showing that the pressure 1395, create 1395 of energy, pressure 1360, producing 1360 of energy. So yeah, we've got a basic efficiency in between these two types of boiler. Then the huge one has another 10%, so it's 20% efficient compared to a 25 boilers. So if we had 25 small boilers, this would have 20% more boiling chamber area. In this particular instance, I've actually got 3 huge boilers, so it's the equivalent of having 75 of these, and that's given us, for the same, approximately 1300 energy. We're only using 0.03 material, significantly less for the same power output. So basically, using huge boilers is good, and there is a reason to do it, and the more boiler space you can create, the better. This also does work obviously with pistons. In piston systems, here we've got a fairly high boiler rate because I'm setting this up to be about the same power. Now yes, this has got 2100 power, but once I put it under load, we'll use the shield to get a load going. Because that's loading up, the speed of this goes down and we get again 1300, approximately 1300 power. It's not as efficient, burning 1.4. This is having to run at 0.86, so 25% or 50% higher burn rate to get the same as the turbine, which is okay because pistons are not as efficient as turbines. So where does this leave the efficiency of steam into comparison to the fuel engine? So here we've got very basic fuel engine. It's nothing amazingly special. It's a turbocharged. We'll give it power so it will speed up, and then we'll do some figures. So running at full power, this is using 277 power per fuel, so that's a fuel use per second of 2.9. so that's the key element, and this is at 800 power, so if we increase that in our calculations by 1.625, then we get approximately 1300, which is the same as we're doing with all these other for our calculation. So how does fuel compare to resources? Because obviously 2.9 is a lot bigger than what we've got running over here, 0.72, 0.63 and 0.03. So the way to work it out, if we, and this depends if you're in campaign mode or whether you're just running this as like almost a tournament mode. So if you've got to buy the basic fuel storage tank, which we have here, that means that for the basic fuel storage tank it's 100 cost for 1000 fuel. So that's a one material gives you 10 fuel. So based on our previous calculation, so 2.9 fuel divided by 10 for the amount of the cost of the fuel, and then time is 0.29 materials, times that by 1.625 is 0.47 materials a second. Basically, in your, what should we say, your straight tournament type of mode, we'll call it for want of a better word, in that you've got no pre-creation of fuel. So yep, at the moment the steam could, with this large one, could be more efficient. It's a little bit more efficient than this medium one here. Actual cost of creating it, your fuel engine here without the cost of the fuel unit, the cost of the engine here is going to be about 300 resource points. If you made one which was 1300 power rather than 800, so that cost you about 1300. And of these boilers here, this steam here is going to cost about 96 resource points. This one costs about 71. This huge boiler costs 835. So in that regard, without the cost of the fuel itself, because that's included in the burn cost of, you're either burning fuel that you put in the ship or you're burning resources you have to have additional to your ship. So we don't include that cost, so it's in the middle. So you can have, these are cheaper, small, but burn more, similar sort of burn rates and similar cost, or huge cost but more efficient. Effectively, campaign mode is different. In that campaign mode you don't build all of your fuel apart from what you need for initially building your ship. You will use a fuel refinery. This is an absolute basic fuel refinery, one of each unit. That's all it's got on some stacks, and that is producing, if we turn it on, 21 fuel per material. So instead of dividing it by 10, we divide it by 21. So that's 2.9 fuel per second. Divide that by 21, times it by 1.625 equals 0.2244 materials per second. Not bad, not bad actually. That's made that a lot more efficient than just giving it a load of fuel storage ones. So we've gone from 0.47 to 0.22, and we haven't exactly done a very efficient refinery. What if we do a not a hugely efficient but more efficient? So this is my Ploeski fuel fort, which I haven't really brought into the campaign but did build ready to bring in, and it's just basically sits on the resource points and churns out fuel. It's not hyper efficient, and you can keep on building this bigger and bigger to make it more efficient, but it's a couple of times more efficient than the previous system, because now we're looking at 262 fuel per material is produced by this particular structure. So that's 10 times, over 10 times, 12 times more efficient than the small basic refinery, and that works out at 2.9 fuel divided by 262 times it by 1.625 equals 0.017 materials per second. So in campaign mode, that little fuel engine here is now getting quite efficient. It's getting down to an efficiency of 0.017, which is more efficient than this huge boiler if you are providing the fuel over from a refinery. So yeah, okay, that's fine, that's fair. So if you produce it in campaign, fuel is still the most efficient way of doing it in turbocharged engines, and steam's going to give you huge power, but if you've got the space to create huge boilers, then you can make it sort of efficient. So good in the campaign. We can now have efficient steam engines as long as you can keep the burn rate low and configure your ACBs to say, if there's no, either reduce your boiler pressure and or reduce the burn rate to the minimum possible in between battles. That way, hopefully when you're on the map, it will hardly use any resources when moving around. So the other big change, which I'm sure loads of people want to see, is missiles, specifically cluster missiles. There has also been some changes to damage, but nothing too major. It's mainly all about the cluster. So first of all, what are cluster missiles and how to make them? So a cluster missile is where one missile holds one or more of a smaller, it doesn't have to be smaller, but certainly not larger, of a same size or smaller missile. It's got to be small enough to fit in the mother missile, for want of a better word. So if we create a very basic system, so we'll go with what I think most people will do, which is they will create a small missile, and we'll just leave this as it is, and the only thing you need to do to make this work is add one unit, and that in here is the munition ejector, which ejects this munition and specifically sets it to be a cluster munition. So now we have 4 small rockets, which they can be independently guided, they could be dumb bombs, whatever, but they are now independent with this cluster munition ejector. So you lose 1 block for the cluster munition. Then you create a container rocket, the one that's going to contain the small rockets. Doesn't have to be very big. It only has to do whatever you need for getting it into range. Let me just bear with me 1 second. So first of all, you're going to need a way of guiding your main missile. Now I'll say here, active radar seeker, I've had some problems with this. I'm to put a bug report in because using that basically ejects the missiles as soon as the guidance delay is over. So we're not going to use those. In this case, we're going to use remote guidance for this moment because I know that works. You then obviously need some fuel and some fins in your tank, but the main bit you need in here is going to be starting with a cluster container controller. Now this can be at either end. I start with this normally because it just goes at the bottom and I can keep adding extensions to see how far I need this. So the cluster container controller says, okay, please go and find a missile, and we can see the size differences down below, and I will and defines when I'm going to eject those missiles. So first of all, we can set distance to target, which can be anything you would like, but yeah, we'll say 500 meters. This smart means that if I've missed the target and going away, release the missiles now so that they can make their own way to the target. Or you could just have this as a dumb fire and say after a certain amount of time just release the cluster missiles anyway. This could be handy for bombs that don't have a targeting system. So once released, so many seconds after release, they automatically start there dropping the cluster munitions, as an example. Stagger, how these will be dropped, so in one go, which I'll leave at the moment, or do I want to stagger the drop from the missile? The size difference is what size. I think this is, if you've got multiple missiles or types on one controller, you could potentially limit as to which size missiles this will take as a valid connector. But in general, I would say that you would keep the missiles separate, in that you'd keep the mother missile with the cluster munition missile. But that may change in the future with ID levels. We'll see how that goes. The rest of it's fairly much the same. Now, to see the next bit, we'll go back to the original one, because there's one important factor here. Down at the bottom right hand side is the container length required, so it needs to be at least 2 meters long, and this is the volume required. It's got to be 0.25 for each missile, so we need 2 meters and 0.25. Now we've got here, so far we have half a meter, so we need 3 more meters, 1.5 more meters, which is basically where we add the extensions on. So we add extension, and we now have 2 meters and 0.9098, which annoyingly is not quite enough to have all 4. And I've noticed, again myself doing this, that if it's exactly right, still it doesn't quite fill it up. You need to have a little bit more than the exact number. That may be due to rounding errors, etc. And now we've got a choice here. We can either, in this particular instance, I can put potentially another fin on this, make it turn, or we can put our own little warhead on this, or we don't have to make the mother missile damaging. It could just be a carrier. It doesn't have to do any damage of its own. It could just put all of its damage into the child missiles. So okay, we've got a very basic missile there. So, and we've got some targets. Let's go and fire it at something and see how it works. So I have set this controller to be on weapon slot 5. On the bottom left hand side, you'll see under 5 it's saying 5 are ready, which is the 4 small child missiles, and we'll call it the mother missile, the container missile, is ready to fire. So if we fire it at a target, and it is up and away, aiming at one of my big C targets out there, and it will make its way towards the target. So the missile is coming into target, and just as it got to the range we'd set in the controller, it's ejected the 4 child missiles, and they are now independently targeting the vessel and attack it separately from the main missile. So, and the main missile can go ahead and attack it if it's in range as well. So that's basically how I've seen a lot of people do it. Now, there is another way, which I like. There's a couple of ways I've been experimenting with, and I like the idea of cluster bombs and cluster munitions. So what we have here is a slightly larger one. This has 8 radar guided cluster munition, and the main payload, it has got an explosive, and it should contain about 8 of these modules at fairly good range. So if we fire this one at the target and we let it go and seek out its prey, so this fired 8 small missiles at the target, and then comes in and attacks it itself with a bit of explosives as well. So you could use the 8 smaller ones as sort of try to remove some of the surface one before the big missile comes in, maybe even EMP before big HE, etc. So that's one way. You can see they fire their small missiles and then comes in with its own little damaging shot. So I like that particular style of cluster. So you can also create these with large missiles. This is a large missile, and this is my cluster bomb. So basically we've got magnetic mines here, and just one very big container here holding all of these mines. So if we now launch this one at the target, off we go. We can see it's going to use all of these mines at the target. Now, one main setting difference on this is I've set no ejector stagger. It ejects them all just at a particular range, about 75 meters. Then the magnets just take them all into the target. I quite like that. I think it's quite funny. It could be interesting to use that on certain types of ships, shall we say. Now, another way to use this is we've been looking at sort of like an attacking just at the last moment on a vessel, but we could also use this as a multi-stage rocket. Now, what I've got here is a medium rocket, and then I've got these quite good, highly agile anti-air missiles with signal processors, etc. These would be good anti-air targets. Good against taking aircraft, but they've only got really a range of about 1,500, 2,000 meters. So what if you wanted to attack a ship, which I have got one, I've got a big balloon target out there, which is about 3,500 meters away. So this rocket has a range of around 1,500, 2,000 meters. Yeah, roughly about 2,000 meters. So for the first 2,000 meters, this will carry them, and then at the end of its range, just before it despawns, it will spawn the other missiles, which will then independently go and seek out the target that they're supposed to go for. I've set them for active radar in this particular case, but they could be infrared, etc. The main target again is remote guidance, so it just guides to the target area and then deploys these, but it has no warhead of its own. Its only job is to carry the missiles. So if we fire this off, we can see it's heading towards the target at a fairly good high speed as well. And just before it despawns, it has spawned in its child systems, which carry on and attack the target. And it's increased the range of those missiles by a good 1.5, 2,000 meters. If we look at the point of separation, that is 2,300 from our target and still 1,000 from the air target. So we've got a good overall 3,500 meter range. And I like those ones, the idea of using it as an extender. The final part is you don't have to contain a smaller missile. You can contain a same size missile. So here we have a torpedo, fairly small medium torpedo, but it is a torpedo, and then we have a medium which just has it obviously has to have quite a lot of cluster containers to contain the missile. And again, I found I needed one more than the actual size, so it's 5.5, even though this says it only needs 5. So I had to put one more in, and the idea is this will take it most of the way to the target, and then again just before it despawns, or if the target is within 1,000 meters, it will drop the main torpedo. So this is basically an ASROC torpedo. The main rocket here is quite fast, so it's going to get to the target fairly quickly. If we just watch this on its way, so the torpedo has now been dropped just at the end of the main torpedo main rocket's flight, and it's locked onto the target and is making its way quite happily towards the target. You could put 4 small, but I think that a medium missile medium torpedo does a lot more damage than 4 small ones potentially. So the cluster munitions can be used in a number of ways. Pure cluster bomb, a guided missile that hits before the main missile hits, We've got extending the range of some missiles, or an ASRock torpedo launcher. I'm sure people will come up with some other interesting ideas. One is obviously use this cluster munition idea but within a plane, so it drops them over the target, but I don't think where the use of that may not be as efficient as just dropping these in the first place, but I'm sure people will have a bit of fun trying out different possibilities for the cluster munition. As always, if you think I've missed something, please leave a comment down below, because yeah, I missed things, I didn't get everything. I'm sure there's some other little changes that I may have missed, but most of them were just tweaks rather than actual any major change in my view. If you think these are going to be good, I'm going to use them in some of my new ships, especially the new Steam system. I think I'm going to be looking at some Italian and French ships, I think, next for my next campaign. Hope you enjoyed that. If I misexplained anything, please let everyone know in the comments. I don't mind. But above all, keep playing the game and have fun.